Chapter 12. Where to Find What One Wants. Long days are evident when exhaustion sets in before noon. Having been through an emotional upheaval, visiting his mother in the hospital and witnessing the genuine concern from his father, and then sitting in the back seat during the silent drive back north, Manny was not feeling competent or awake enough to enter the school again or do anything that he was instructed to do. Without any motivation to stay in the course of action Abuelos had expected of him, he watched the scenery out his window become more familiar until the brick building in which the classrooms were located slid beside the car. He had acclimated to the enclosed environment of the auto and found the solace of the encapsulated space too perfect to give up. The space itself was not comforting, but the removal from the reality that was made known to him was markedly uncomfortable. He recalled how they had arrived at the hospital and entered into the clinic area where his mother was resting in a bed which his father sat beside. His mother had a dazed manner, and her body and features seemed like liquid only barely held in shape by a thinning layer of skin. Her smile was small yet honest, and her brow was relaxed. Her calmness sat beside the clear anxiety of his father like the beams of sunlight framed by shadows. He had never seen his father in this light before, and the situation offered no comfort. A pleading behind his eyes, beneath a furrowed brow, cheekbones that emanated uncertainty. His father wore an expression that frightened Manny to his core. He had never seen his father in this light before because his father never allowed his boy to see him in this state. The situation merited the lax adherence to that standard, and with unsettling clarity, Manny saw the fear that gripped his father. Manny brought his eyes back to his mother, and a cold chill swept across his heart and ceased any tears for the pitiful sight that were flowing outward. He walked to his mother's side and ran his hand along her arm. Weakly, yet coherently, she told him she was going to be fine while she crossed her arm over her chest to touch her son's hand. He asked her about the baby, and she looked to her husband's father before looking back to Manny, reassuring him that the baby would be fine too. She had just worked too fast without taking a break, and the baby wanted her to take a break, and what the baby says goes. She smiled. Manny did not. His father stood as the nurse entered the area. Manny watched his father and Abuelo walk out of the room while exchanging hushed words that Manny could not distinguish over the nurse talking to his mother while adjusting the placement of patches from which wires extended to a machine next to the bed. The nurse was talking about the heartbeat of the baby, and Manny moved closer to the curtain while looking at the picture ID card the nurse was wearing. M. Kraus, RN. He looked intently at the picture and listened to the conversation his father and Abuelo were having just beyond the curtain. The cost of the hospital care was extremely high. His father was nervously conveying this. There was no insurance to help with the cost, and he would not have any way to pay for the care she would need. Abuelo offered help, and Manny heard angry whispers from his father that the help would not be enough. His father's voice was angry and sad, all at the same time, yet remained in whispers. Manny could only make out faint words, but knew his father was upset that his baby and his wife could die. Manny swallowed hard and felt himself start to tear up. M. Krauss, RN, speaking in a loud voice about how strong his mother was being and that the baby would be strong too, turned and looked to Manny. Her smile turned to curiosity, and she walked to Manny and crouched down in front of him. Tu madre y bebé es okay, she said. Y mi español es muy mal. See? She followed up. And Manny nodded as his frown turned into a slight smile. M. Krauss, RN, shifted her eyes, and her smile became hollow as she listened to the voices beyond the curtain. She stood up quickly and put her hand on Manny's shoulder. Ira tu madre. She pressed him toward the bed and walked beyond the curtain. Manny heard M. Krauss, RN, tell his father and abuelo, "Vámonos," and heard their footsteps get softer. At the bedside, Manny listened to his mother and abuela talk about the different foods his mother would need to eat to keep some numbers from making her blood too sweet. His mother told Manny that she would likely be coming north soon until the baby was born. What would happen then, they were uncertain. Manny offered to go back to the fields with his father, and his mother sternly told him that he would not. Abuela told him that he would need to return to school and would need to stay more focused than he had ever before. His family would need to know that he could take great care in his education and be good without them watching that he was doing good things. He felt a chill down his back, like he was being given more responsibility and that no one would be watching him. Abuela and his mother began talking rapidly about what he thought was money, and he tried to listen, but they spoke so quickly and over each other that he could not hear clearly. He imagined that his mother was talking like his father was earlier about the cost of the hospital care, but he heard Abuela trying to calm her by telling how they would find the way to make the good home for the family. Manny's father returned with M. Krauss, RN, followed by Abuelo. Abuelo motioned to Abuela and Manny to come with him. Manny jumped upward and hugged his father, who lifted him in the embrace. The constriction of his father's arms squeezed the breath from him, and he got lost in the warmth between them. Returned to his feet, he saw Abuela retract from her kiss to his mother, and he stepped forward before being lifted from behind by his father. Hovering close to his mother, he gave her a kiss and let her hand run down his face. Abuelo shuttled he and Abuela from the room, whispering that the nurse needed to speak with them. The brief and intense visit came to a close, and Manny felt no greater comfort than he did before they arrived. The drive back was silent. As he stood by the car, as he closed the door behind him, he looked at the school and knew that the education inside was what he ought to have. Yet in that moment, it was not what he wanted. He waved to the car when it began to move down the street and then started walking towards the front door of the school. He walked past the steps, put his hands in his pockets, and walked to the corner. He stopped and looked back at the school. He looked down the street and back up it. His hands were out of his pockets, and his arms began to pump. It wasn't until he was across the street that he knew he was running. His lips became dry with the air passing over them, and he adjusted his breathing to be in syncopation with each set of steps. His legs felt good, and his chest heaved with each deep inhalation. He turned and headed down another block, then another and another. He made one more turn and stopped to look upward at the large crane that was in motion at that very moment. He set himself towards it and began to run. His mind churned with an idea, and he decided what he wanted. He ran and imagined how the city would look from up there. He tried to picture heights and knew that there would be very few who could endure being that high. There would be only a few people who could ever work that high up in the sky, and he knew that he could be one of them. He would go to the construction site and find the boss. He knew that he wanted to do that kind of work, and he could convince the boss that he could do it. He would learn the controls. He would show how he wasn't afraid. He knew that his family would need him to work to afford the hospital care, and they would be so happy to see that he could work so well. His mother might be afraid, but his father would let him do it. If he would need to work, then he would work where he wanted to work. He would not waste another day in that school. They needed the money now. He ran straight along the sidewalk and dodged the people who walked in the same direction and swerved around those walking the opposite. He quickly glanced up and down cross streets and luckily avoided any cars. As he ran closer to the construction site, the road he ran along was closed to cars, but nothing blocked the sidewalk until the fence about halfway down the block. He slowed his pace, and he neared and touched the fence, his fingers curling around the diamond-shaped links as he breathed heavily. He looked into the area and was unnoticed by any of the men wearing helmets and orange vests who performed steadily and strong the tasks of the construction. He walked along the perimeter following the fence, noticing the movement of the workers and the sounds getting louder throughout the building. Echoes from multiple floors reverberated and made for a mess of percussion that were pierced by loud, whirring mechanical sounds, shouts, and crackles of loud static from radios with their volumes turned way up. He watched as he walked and eventually reached a point in the fence where it no longer stood to block him from the inside. He began walking forward. "Hey, kid!" A loud and smooth voice barked near him, and he spun to his left to see a man walking towards him. "You shouldn't be in here!" Somehow the man's voice was louder than all other noises combined. Frozen in place, Manny watched the man walk closer as he continued, his voice becoming louder with each step. "It's dangerous here, you understand? Peligroso, comprende?" Manny stepped back as the man approached. "I want to work," Manny shouted, but thought his voice was overpowered. "I want to work," he shouted with all the breath his voice could muster. The man stopped and looked at him with veiled amusement. Impressed by the child's statement, he responded, "You union?" Manny did not know what to make of the question, and the guy crouched down near him. "Nah, you wouldn't be yet. Sorry, we're union only here." He put a hand on Manny's shoulder and started leading him back to the entranceway. "Why do you want to work here anyway?" "Not just here. Up there." Manny pointed toward the crane, and the man didn't have to follow the direction to know what the child meant. "You want to operate the tower crane, huh? How old are you, kid?" Manny's eyes shifted from the tower to the man. "Cuánto años?" 12, Manny lied. "Well, you have a lot of years to go before you can be here, and you need to learn a lot to get up there." He gestured over his shoulder to the crane. "Get back into school and study, play some sports and stay fit and strong. And, this is the important part, stay on the lookout for a trade school you would like to go to." "Can you say back to me?" The confusion on Manny's face prompted a repetition. "Trade school," he said. "Trade school," Manny repeated. "There you go. It takes a lot to get to work here, but I think you can do it." The man directed Manny back to the outside. "For now, your job is to do good in school." Manny managed a smile and a nod as he turned to walk away. Crushed, he waited until he was at the end of the block, then turned and ran across the street up the block away from the construction site. He ran. His legs began to burn. His chest began to hurt. His lips cracked from his dry breath. He continued to run, hoping to find some place where he could get what he wanted. The physical excursion into the world to locate where he should be. He knew it wasn't with his family. He knew it wasn't in school. He now knew that it wasn't at the top of the crane where he imagined his heroic escape from the life he realized he had. He was about to be the older brother to a child. He was about to have the next years of his life taken from him so that he could be part of the support for this baby that he didn't know and didn't want around. He wanted his life to be as he wanted it, not how he was expected to have it. So he ran, and would have continued running if he did not pique the notice of a woman driving through the area willing to be distracted from her own drama by the sight of a young boy running away from whatever his problems might be.